Welcome, everyone. This is Rocket Lab Weekly, episode number 9. I'm here with real Matt Money, and there is a lot to talk about. So all of our Twitter descriptions are in the description box below. And let's begin. There was really a lot happening this week. I have quite some news prepared, and we can go over them with our reactions. I actually wanted to start with a historical Rocket Lab thing. Somebody posted on Twitter the first ever Rocket Lab launch that was done, and I'm gonna see if I can share it with you guys. Does everybody see? Do you see my screen, Matt?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Wait one sec.
Oh, you mean like the 2009 one? I thought you meant the Electron. Okay, this is going way back. Cool.
Yeah, this is going way back. And what's interesting about this is that Peter Beck is wearing a white lab coat because he is trying to. This is from the book When the Heavens Went on Sale by Ashley Vance. And in the beginning of the company, he very much tried to legitimize that they are, like a lab. And this is why he has a lab coat, and they had zero financing. And watch how scrappy everything is. I think the guys here are all the employees of the company. And watch his reactions. And we come back to this. But this is Rocket Lab history here. It's only 2 minutes. We can start with this.
Is it playing for you? It's not playing for me.
It's playing for me, but I don't know if it's play. Can people in the comments?
I'm still seeing the Twitter. I'm still seeing the Twitter.
Share. Yeah. Okay, here we go.
There you go.
Yeah, it's good that you caught it because okay, now it should play. Is it good now?
In the tradition of New Zealand explorers, New Zealand, we are go for space. Arm igniter. Arm oxygen. Aero coupler disconnect. Confirm. ISO 2. Open. Ignition. 10, 9, 8. Oxygen. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yay, fucking duty! Yes!
Peter's the man.
She's still burning! 22 seconds, we're home free to space! Listen for the second stage!
Yeah, that's the part that I wanted to show.
That's awesome, man. I'd actually never seen that before, believe it or not.
That's crazy. I mean, how far did we come, guys? How far do you see how scrappy everything was? And I think that was all the employees of Rocket Lab.
That's pretty crazy. I mean, I knew I've read about the history and basically, and I've looked a lot of the first launches from Electron forward, but I've never really looked at the launches from 2009 to 2017 once they got Electron up off the ground. So just goes to show I need to do a little bit more research. Need to do a little bit more DD.
I mean, this was thanks to Rocket Lab Plab. He's a fantastic follow on Twitter, and he recently posted like Rocket Lab. I also didn't know about this, so he recently posted this, and I was like, this is going to be awesome to show. So next news of the podcast is going to be the launch of our rocket, and It was delayed, as I'm sure you guys have heard. I was a bit disappointed that it was delayed. And if you read the announcement, there is something scary about this. It says we are just days away from our 10th Electron launch this year, making 2023 our busiest launch year yet. So far, so good. With plans to more than double that launch cadence in 2024, there has never been a more exciting time to join our team. And this is basically a recruitment post. What I reacted on here is we are planning on 2 launches more this year. So this one and one more, and that makes it 11. And the 22 launches that is next year is exactly the double of the 11. So if they are saying that we are planning to more than double the launches, does that mean that there is no more launch this year? What do you think, Matt?
That there's no more launch. I mean, I feel pretty confident that they have the satellite that they need to put up into space, and so, I feel like they'll at least get one more launch off personally. But
yeah, but
how
that's the
these things
10th.
tick.
Yeah, but that's the 10th, right? So and then we need 11. Like we need 2 more, not one more.
So yeah, I mean, I'm very confident that we'll get at least one more off, and I think with respect to getting the 11th off, I think what is necessary is just a quick turnaround time. I think that they've done launches within I'm trying to remember if it was a 7-day or 4 days of each other. I know they've definitely got it down to less than a week or a week at one point. I'm not sure if it was less than a week or not, but and that was earlier this year. So or maybe it was late last year. I'm trying to remember the timeline. But regardless, I think there will definitely be at least one, and who knows? I mean, it all is very dependent upon what that last contract is. Is it Rocket Lab Photon, or is it somebody else's satellite that they're going to have to use? I feel confident that if it's a Photon and it's a Rocket Lab vessel that's being launched into space, I think they'll probably be more than ready for sometime in the second half of December. But you never know when it comes to somebody else's vehicle that has to be launched up into space. Are they ready? Because that just increases the additional timelines, right? You're having to not only ship it from their facilities, but then you're shipping it to New Zealand or to Virginia, and it's all dependent upon them. So I don't know enough about what the 11th contract is for the year to truly comment on it perfectly.
Yeah. Or it can be also interpreted as a very bullish thing, because maybe they will pull off more than 22 launches. So if they maybe we will get 11 launches this year and then 23 next year. I don't know.
I mean, you might have hit the nail on the head there. I mean, they're forecasting 22 launches, but aren't they going to put Neutron on the pad next year?
Oh, yeah. Here we go.
So maybe they're just being bullish. Maybe they know more than they're letting on. I'm not entirely sure where they are with respect to engine testing for the Archimedes engine, but yeah, we'll see.
By the way, on Twitter, I saw some chatter about another guy, Nico Birchholz. I probably butchered his name. And he said that there is chatter that they are late on Neutron, and it's still recoverable, maybe that they still make it in 2024, and it depends on certain tests, but they're not announcing anything yet. But it's looking like it's a little bit late and might go into 2025, which I think we have counted with in all of our valuations. We were like, okay, the first half of 2025 is still okay. But have you heard anything like this? Have you seen anything like this?
I mean, I've heard a lot of people, just chatting, but I haven't seen any evidence, right? And I think the only evidence that I've seen, I haven't seen concrete evidence, I should say. I think the only evidence that I've truly seen thus far is maybe just the last quarter and where they were with respect to Neutron testing. And there was 2 or 3 items that hadn't been checked off. And I wasn't entirely sure if that was a fiscal year 2023 checkoff list, or if that was specifically for 3Q. Because if it was specifically for 3Q, then obviously there was 2 or 3 items out of the 10 that they wanted to knock out. And obviously that means that they had to knock it out in the fourth quarter, or if that was a list for fiscal year 23. It wasn't necessarily entirely concrete as to what they were sharing with that.
Yeah. We got a comment from Francisco Ramirez. Matt, I posted a video for you, Dave, and Vince a few videos back. I don't know which one he means. Maybe he can put
I think
it
he
in
means
the
the
link.
Atia one that you just launched or that you just shared.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So now regarding Neutron, there is drama in our space. So this has come from Dave G Invest. He's also a fantastic Twitter account to follow when it comes to Rocket Lab. And he posted this article, shots fired. It used to be Back versus Camp. Is it not going to be Back versus Ellis? And this links to an article where Relativity Space CEO is basically saying he's refuting what Beck has said, and he's like, I don't know if you can say he's calling out Beck for lying, but he's basically, let me just read the last part of the article that he's saying. So he said, in final refutation of Beck's comments, Ellis said, to set the record straight, that the company has actually gone head-to-head against Rocket Lab's Neutron for some of these contracts. We have 100% win rate against competitors that were in those deals, trying to win them against us. And I can go on the record to say that Rocket Lab was absolutely in some of those deals. So the statement that they're not trying to build a backlog is not true, because we actually won against them several times. So this is some heavy shots fired. What are your raw thoughts about this?
I mean, I personally believe Beck. I mean, I don't necessarily think that Beck would really lie through his teeth directly to people like that personally. And it could very well be that going with Rocket Lab was on the table, but Beck might not have been at the table, if you know what I'm trying to say, where they might have said, oh, well, should we go with the Neutron or should we go with Relativity's Terran R? And they said, well, they're not really in communication at the moment or trying to market it at the moment. So, while they might be weighing it, they had to go eventually with Relativity because obviously, but I think there's a lot I could say about this. I think, I don't discredit Relativity. They were able to get a launch off on their first attempt in earlier this year, which was very good, but they have one launch and one that has yet to get to orbit. Go ahead. You want to interject and say something?
Yeah, I was going to say that launch was not 100% successful. Like it didn't make it to, it made it to space, but it didn't make it to orbit.
Yeah.
Which can be like orders of magnitude harder to go into orbit than just into space.
Yeah. So let's just give some people some context. So the Terran 1, which was mostly 3D printed, not 100%, but mostly 3D printed. They're into the headlines, right? The world's, it's like, well, majority of Electron is also 3D printed, and that's been going into space, on and off since 2018. So, you could say whatever you want, but like you noted, the Terran 1 wasn't entirely a successful launch. It failed to get the second stage off entirely, and I recognize that there's been some failures associated with Electron, but over 35 launches plus have gone in successfully to orbit with Rocket Lab, and so with respect to that, it's a little bit of, I think, showmanship here to try to make it understandable as to like, okay, yeah, you can tout yourself up, $1.8 billion worth of backlog, but at the end of the day, one of you guys has really been successful over a number of years. And to me, I think it's just a piece where, okay, they might be trying to get as many contracts up front as possible to be able to get contract value and help with funding and things of the like. But Rocket Lab doesn't need anybody's funding. Rocket Lab is funding everything themselves, right? That's why they went public, to be able to get some of that $900 million when they de-SPAC'd. And part of that was utilized to get the space systems segment of their business off the ground. And some of it was obviously used for Neutron. And they're self-funding it versus Relativity. they're going to market. They're being able to, and I guess you could say as well, Rocket Lab, went to market as well to be able to de-SPAC. But I think what I'm trying to say is eventually the tables will turn. Relativity can say whatever they want, but once Rocket Lab gets Neutron into space, late 24 or early 25, I think a lot of the contracts will go the other way, because I anticipate that, Relativity, it'll be the second launch that they ever do, right?
Yeah.
If you think about it in that respect, even if the Terran R is successful, it'll be the second launch that they ever do. To me, I would rather much go with a company that has a track record and is able to get something up. So the fact that they're going to be out in 2026 for their first launch doesn't even mean that's going to be a commercial launch, but just a first launch means eventually the tide will swing and Rocket Lab will be able to likely steal some of those contracts because people probably want to get to space sooner. They want to go in 2025 or 2026. They don't want to wait until late 26 or early 27 before commerciality truly becomes something for Relativity to be able to deliver.
Yeah, I mean, I also have the same view as you exactly, and I think that probably what has happened is Peter Beck is not willing to go down on price, right? So if you're a young space company, so let's say I try to recreate in my head what happened at the negotiating table. So you're like the space company who needs, 10 satellites in space. And then you can choose Neutron, where they're not willing to give a discount. They're like, it will be 55 million per launch, take it or leave it. We're not willing to discount, Or you have Relativity, who comes, and we know that they're, I forgot the number, how much their target price was. Do you know how much their target price is for a fully priced launch?
For a Neutron specifically, or Relativity?
No. For Relativity.
I have no idea.
Oh, I remember now. I think it was because they're competing with the Falcon 9. So I think it was like 63 million. But then even in this article, he admits that they do this dynamic pricing, and that their price has gone like 50% higher since a year or 2 years ago. So again, let's recreate in our heads. We sit at the negotiating table. So you have 55 million for Neutron, and then this young company comes, and then they're like, look, we will take what you want to send for 40 million. You're getting a 30%, 33% discount from 60 million to 40 million. And if we don't manage to keep the contract, we don't manage to fly the rocket, then you're free to choose someone else. So if you're sitting on the board of this company, you're like, okay, we take zero risk. We buy this 44 million contract. And if they don't deliver, we can always go on the Neutron for 55 or on a Falcon 9 for 63. So I think both is kind of right, because I don't see how you can get off a space launch company without giving discounts and without trying to build a backlog. But I also see that Peter Beck has proven himself, and the company is way past this period, and he can tell them what Elon did, GYF, and our price is 50 55 or whatever the Neutron target price is. Cool. So then we go to the next piece of news, which is also was brought to my attention by Dave G on Twitter. And that is that Amazon buys SpaceX rocket launches for the Kuiper satellite internet project. And that's very, very interesting news, as we have this rivalry between Musk and Bezos. And there was a shareholder lawsuit when Amazon announced that they are, buying a lot of launches from everyone except for SpaceX. And a lot of investors felt that, Amazon and Blue Origin are two different companies, and Amazon board and the Amazon CEO is responsible to make the best return for Amazon shareholders. And if that means flying with SpaceX, then, F you're flying with SpaceX. And it looks like that's exactly what is happening. And is this good or bad for our Neutron? What do you think about this news, Matt?
I think anything's positive, right? I think anything's positive for the sector. And apologies, somebody was at my front door. I was like, "Am I going to have to answer this?" But it was just somebody trying to sell me something. They just left a little post-it, I guess, on my door. But I think it's positive for the sector, and I think it just goes to show that you're having more and more people going to space. You have Amazon going out for contracts. You have Apple going out for contracts, and people might view, oh, this is something that is going to be bad for, say, Rocket Lab, or it's going to be bad for Relativity or whomever. But at the end of the day, SpaceX has had dozens, if not hundreds, of launches at this point, and I think it just goes to show that there's continued demand increase for the sector, and I think the competitiveness is good, and I think that they'll have 2 or 3 very medium to large launch vehicles that will compete. ULA is already looking to struggle a little bit with respect to cadence. And so I think at the end of the day, you have 4 players that are trying to enter the market here that have pretty good potential for cadence. And, you have more than enough contracts to go around. In terms of Amazon specifically going to SpaceX, I mean, sure, it might be a short-term blow, but what do you expect? Rocket Lab doesn't have a usable rocket at the moment for medium launch.
Yeah. And I was actually thinking that maybe this is why they only ordered 3, right? Because Amazon could, it's like thousands and thousands of satellites that they're sending up. And I think that they need probably upwards of 100 launches. And they could have given it all to SpaceX. And maybe they are also like, they have to send up stuff, right? They have a deadline that is coming up where their FAA license will be pulled if they don't have a certain amount of satellites up by a certain date. I think that date is 2026. And so that they had the gun to their head, but they're not pulling the trigger on all the launches. So maybe they are also waiting for, Neutron to come on. I don't think that they're specifically waiting on Neutron. I think that they're just waiting on the competition. Like, okay, there is going to be options, and maybe Relativity will be ready. Maybe Blue Origin will be ready. Maybe Rocket Lab will be ready, and then they will take the decisions as the time dictates at that time.
I think the thing that's most notable is that, we can talk about who is going to win till we're blue in the face, but at the end of the day, we're here because 1 out of the 5 that we're discussing, whether it's ULA, SpaceX, Relativity, or Blue Origin, 1 out of the 5 is actually tradable. And do you want to be part of the sector or not? And to me, this just goes to show that the sector is still piping up, and the total addressable market, as it's shown out to 2030, 2032, is continuing to grow.
Yeah. Okay, you brought up such an interesting point. So yes, Rocket Lab is technically the only one that is tradable, right? But would you buy shares in Relativity, for example? Because I to be honest, when this news came out, I knew very little bit about Relativity. I've heard their name, and I did a video about what I thought about this whole situation, and I had to research Relativity very, very deeply. And Relativity is not a launch provider and a space systems like Rocket Lab. And if you think that Rocket Lab's income it's probably wrong to think how I think, but just for simplicity's sake, if you think 66% of Rocket Lab is space systems and the valuation is 2 billion, so then the rocket launch services is only 30% of the 2 billion valuation. So just the launch services is around 600 million valued. Okay, so this is just, you can tell me, Matt, later if I'm wrong on this, but let's say that we say that the rocket launch part of Rocket Lab is probably around 600 million worth. Now, Relativity with 0 launches to orbit, 1 launch that went to space, and we know that the difference between the two can be like 2 orders of magnitude, and they have a backlog of 1.8 billion, which is questionable. Peter Beck is questioning it, and they were valued at $4.2 billion only for the launch. So and Rocket Lab, who has a successful rocket, they have money to develop their next rocket, 40 something launches, 150 satellites in space is only 600 million. So would you invest in Relativity?
I think it would depend on the valuation. I mean, if you're going with the $4 billion valuation, I wouldn't. I'd wait for it to crash to below $1 billion, and then I'd probably pick up some.
Okay. And then would you invest in Blue Origin?
I'd have to look at the roadmap of both, to be honest with you. I mean, I can kind of understand what the roadmap is for Rocket Lab, and I can see the path to profitability and the sustainability aspect of Rocket Lab's business, whereas I'm a little bit more questionable about what Blue Origins is. Is it really just a thing to get Bezos into space, or does he actually want it to be a sustainable business, right? Just like how SpaceX was a little bit questionable for a while until you started to see a lot of the Starlink income, right? And it's just like, well, that's a sustainable business, right? They're going to be around here for a while. But now the question is even with SpaceX, would I invest in something like that? And I think it all depends on, there's still a lot of ifs, ands, or buts, because are they just going to sell off the Starlink business? If it was Starlink specifically, am I investing in Starlink? I would likely say yes, if the valuation was appropriate. If you're saying SpaceX as a whole, that's a questionable business model, right? 2030s, they're going to be very focused on getting to Mars, and that's going to be very capital intensive. And will they have the capital framework to do that, or will they be supplemented by NASA? I mean, all these different things that you have to kind of take into consideration. Versus Rocket Lab at the moment, I think has a very clear vision of everything that goes into space and want a Rocket Lab logo on it, whether it's their solar panels or Photon, or whether it's their launch vehicle. I think it's very easy to say, and they're also very, at this moment, just because of the SEC obligations, they're the ones that are closest to, maybe other than SpaceX or ULA, that are close to profitability, that has the transparency that you would need to invest in it. Relativity barely has any revenue at the moment. All they have is a backlog. So it's very difficult for me to say, okay, let me put money forward to this. And same thing with Blue Origin. I don't necessarily know what the backlog and revenue stream looks like for them. And I also don't really know the launch cadence that they're forecasting either.
Yeah, they're a private company, and it would be, when you said that SpaceX is questionable business model, like I don't even think they have a business model outside of Starlink, because I think that the thought is that it will manifest itself as you go. Like there will be something that they can do between Earth and Mars that is going to make it worthwhile. And I think that they're just worried about getting there.
Yeah.
And
I guess the real question is like, what's the purpose of investing? Is it to be part of something that's for the greater good of humanity, or is it to make money? And I think that if you were to say one or the other, I could see myself investing in all of them if it was for all of humanity, because I do believe in launch. And I think, space exploration excites me at my core, versus if it's about making money and ensuring that you make money from a capital risk exposure perspective. I think Rocket Lab is, other than SpaceX, I think Rocket Lab is probably the number 2, but you can't invest in SpaceX.
Yeah, exactly.
For now.
And yes. And just to address the people's comments also, like, yes, Relativity Space has very serious backing. Like I was shocked when I was doing the research so probably because they have such heavy pockets with a lot of connections. That's also probably why they have this huge backlog without having a successful rocket to space. And yes, so I think Relativity, once they manage to launch, they will be a serious contender, just because of how heavy hitters or how much heavy pockets that there was behind this company. But okay, so back to this question. So SpaceX is valuation dependent, but it's more like Starlink that you would invest into. Relativity, not at the current valuation, even if you could invest into it. Blue Origin, you want to know more about it, and it's not investable without them forecasting stuff and figuring out what's happening with Bezos. And the last company out of this is ULA, which I wouldn't touch because we don't know what is happening with them. So can I say that it's not only that by the fate of the universe, Rocket Lab is the only one that is like available on the public markets, but it's also the only one that is like even investable, like meaning that it has a good valuation. It's actually an opportunity, a clear roadmap. They're fully funded. They're not dependent on a super rich, founder that keeps sending their wealth to space. What do you think about this?
I mean, I think if you think about it, so if we get to the point where, let's just take in spitting strides here, because we haven't gotten there yet, but let's just say we get to a place where we're making $400 to $500 million a year in revenue, and we're at the 20 to 25% non-GAAP sort of margin, right? You're going to be able to make from that, let's just take 125-ish million, and let's just call it 2.2 billion divided by the 125. I mean, in a very short order, this thing's going to be trading at a PE of less than 25 times with the kind of area and sector that it's in. Now that's on a that's on an adjusted and non-GAAP basis, right? But to me, that's more important because that's what's actually the cash flow that's going to be hitting the door. And I know a lot of people like to take into consideration the share-based compensation piece as well. But imagine once we get to a 1 to 1.5 billion sort of revenue rate, which could take some time. Because obviously we're going to have to grow, and I think next year is going to be a true pivot point for the company in terms of revenue increase. But let's just say we get to that point, whatever your forecast is on when we get to it, if it is still a 25% margin in that respect, then you're looking at close to 250 to $300 million worth of income, and the company's only worth 2.2 billion right now. So eventually it's going to hit a point where this thing starts becoming profitable and people are like, oh, this thing's actually relatively cheap. I think the reason why it's not currently selling at a reasonable valuation, and closer to 5 billion or anything like that, is because it's still burning cash. I think if you were to remove, and this is part of the problem that I have with some of the way that they do some of the financials, but I think it'll eventually be a huge benefit for us as earlier investors. As soon as Neutron comes to fruition and that ends up being a profitable revenue stream, or even just like a revenue stream in general, I think that you're going to see a huge tailwind to the stock. And I think right now you're not floating just one rocket launch business. You're floating two rocket launch businesses. You're floating a medium and a small launch business, where the small launch, which we'll see next year, is hopefully going to be extremely profitable. Approaching close to 50% gross margin is what they were kind of forecasting for next year. And maybe not next year entirely, but once you get to a place where they said 6 launches per quarter, you're getting close to a 50% gross margin. Like, that's huge. And that's before you start having a lot of reusability and extra steps that are built in. So who knows what the true longevity of that business might be. And the fact that they aren't in a poor cash situation like some of the other companies like Astra and Velo 3D and a few of these other places that are strapped for cash, is positive. I don't know. Anyway, I think that if any company that is in small launch, this one is the most destined to succeed. And I may not have answered your question appropriately, but I think that 2 billion will soon turn to 5 billion very quickly.
Say that again. What was the last sentence?
2 billion market cap will turn to 5 billion market cap very quickly.
Yeah, I would tend to agree also. And yes, when I was, just to reply to this comment by Jan, when I was studying also the difference between the two companies, Relativity has, I don't remember, I said it in the video, but like comparable amount of employees to Rocket Lab with 0 successful launches. Like, what are those people doing? And I think that they're definitely suffering from, the too much money. Like, they have so much funding behind them that they are just wasting money. Whereas I feel that that's one of the strong points with Peter Beck, is he's so frugal with how he thinks with money. And that's a very, very big plus point. It sucks to be without money, but when you make it without money, it's a huge plus point in the end. And talking about money, the last news that we are going to cover before some other topics is insider selling in Rocket Lab, which was news this week. CFO Adam Spice sells 57,721 shares, and this can spook a lot of people. And I just want to show, because I wanted to research, this is Yahoo and insider sales. So basically, Adam Spice got his shares, it looks like, on May 12th. I don't know if this is when he was hired. Do you know how long he has been with Rocket Lab?
With whom? Sorry?
The CFO, Adam Spice.
I think he was part of one of the other businesses that they acquired. I'll do some research in the background, but I'm pretty certain he joined on with one of the companies. I think it might have been Solero, or it might have been one of the other companies they acquired in late 2021.
Yeah, because it looks like in May 2022, he got 1.8 million shares of Rocket Lab. And Rocket Lab on this date was around $5. And if you do the math, this works out to be $9-point-something million. My guess is that it was supposed to be like a $10 million grant that he got. And then it looks like that every 3 months, he sells off about 200,000 worth of stock. So I think that this was a pre-planned sale. So he's selling off like 2% of his 2-3% of his portfolio, and because it's such a low amount, I don't even consider that this is an issue. What he has Christmas coming up, maybe he has kids, maybe he has a trophy wife who needs a new haircut and silicone
Taxes.
boobs and Texas,
But I want to stand completely wrong here. Adam was part of the business way before 2021. He's joined in 2018 timeframe as CFO. So just want to stand.
All right. So this is probably like vested. This what he got is probably something that vested after I don't know how many years he has been the CEO.
May
CFO.
2018. So looked like so.
Yeah, 4 years, because that's very usual that your stocks vest after 4 years of having to stay at the company.
It also could be the fact that they weren't publicly disclosing it because it was private before.
Yeah, that can also be. So do you get spooked because he's selling? And what do you think? Is it a red flag that he sold?
I don't get spooked by this sort of stuff. I mean, it could be, I'd have to look at his total amount of shares and what he's kind of got over time. But I think it's always kind of prudent. I mean, I get shares in the company that I work for, and I always sell them too, right? I mean, you have to think you get paid well by the organization in which you're in. And you have to think about the longevity sometimes of, I think it's very easy for us to look in and peer into somebody's life and say, oh my God, how are they selling out? But you have to think it could be something as simple as he's rediversifying that capital into the S&P 500. So in case, unfortunately, if he ever passes away, or in case, Rocket Lab deems himself unsuccessful or gets acquired or something of the like, he has capital elsewhere. He might have, like you said, family, friends, children to take into consideration. And he could be selling part of this as tax as well. So I think a lot of people like to peer into some of this stuff and maybe overthink. It'd be one thing if he was selling off, tens of millions of dollars worth. And him being an employee since 2018, I'm sure he's got tens of millions of dollars of shares. But I don't see this as a big problem, and it seems like it's pretty routine if you look on a quarterly basis.
Yeah, it looks like it was completely scheduled. It's his Christmas bonus. I wish I had that much to spend on my family this Christmas.
Someday, once Rocket Lab gets to 20 billion.
Deal. And cool. Then I want to ask you about something. I saw a very interesting tweet about that a guy had $42,000 invested in Rocket Lab, and he was asking if it would be a good idea to sell the shares now and rediversify into, let's say, the S&P 500, and then come back to Rocket Lab when I don't know when, like when he said when it's better, but I don't know when that is. And we don't give financial advice here, but so if you were in his position, obviously this is not enough data because we don't know if he has an emergency, if he has wives. He said he was 30 years old. So the reason why he's thinking about this is because he wants to take it safer. So if you were in his shoes, what would you do?
Well, I would say I was in his shoes not too long ago. I mean, I don't know what the size of the rest of his portfolio is, but it's the older I get and the more money I get, the more risky I can get with my investments, because I can always fall back on having a large portfolio, the majority of which is in the S&P 500 or in safer investments. And also I have some stock that I get through the organization in which I work as well. So that I could always sell off and invest into safer businesses. Now, I think he just needs to double check what his end goal is, right? I always talk about this on my channel. So for those of you guys that have listened to this a million times, it's all, I apologize and appreciate your patience, but I always talk about with anybody when they're investing, or even sometimes in life, you can probably apply this ideology. Look at the 5 key things of what you're doing. And the first and foremost is, what's the objective, right? If your objective is to be safe and secure and, just have a little bit of a nest egg and retire with, then the easiest thing to do is just add capital every single month and invest in the S&P 500. But another piece to dive into to maybe understand, the difference in the polarization of what you can do for investing is understand what your time horizon is, understand what your risk tolerance is, understand how active or passive you want to be investing in the market, and then also understand, how active you're going to be contributing to the portfolio. And so those 5 things, the objective, time horizon, risk tolerance, how active or passive you want to be, and how much additional capital you're going to add, is going to show and change completely how and how you attack everything. Because let's say you don't have any time whatsoever. Do you just want to be a passive investor? You're not going to sign yourself up to day trade, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or you're not going to sign yourself up to do real estate because you might have to do leases and you might have to. So to understand where you're kind of coming from.
If you can't follow the company like we are here on Rocket Lab Weekly, and you're not willing to put that in, it's fine. Buy the S&P 500.
Yeah. So for me, the way I look at it is, I honestly didn't have nearly as large of a position as you did up until about 2 weeks ago when I bought another, what was it, 3,000 shares, or was it 2,500 shares, whatever it was.
Ooh, that's news.
Well, I think I'm up to like 5,000 shares, I think.
Wow.
So not as much as you, but getting closer to something that's meaningful, right? And it got back to the conversation that you and I were having, which is, what's the end goal here? And my thought process was like, well, if I want this to be $150,000, $200,000 position, right? It's going to be very hard for me to get to that point. To let's just say it's a $200,000 position, and I only had like 2,200 shares or something like that. I need the stock price to go to $90, right? It's very difficult for that to be foreseeable at the moment because it's sitting at what, $4.50. So it's going to have to be almost 25x from here, which it's a little bit difficult to say. Versus now, if I want to get to $200,000 position and I've posted a 5,000 shares, all I need the share price to go is 40, which I could see it potentially getting from a $2 billion market cap to a $20 billion market cap. So that 10x is good, right? So having $200,000 position, all I need is a 10x. Jesus, all I need is a 10x because I have $20-some thousand invested in the company. If it 10x's, then well, there I have it. I have a $200,000 position in the company, and I kind of worked myself into it. But it's really all the math that you need to figure out, right? Like, do you just want to get to? My objective is this, right? So my perspective is, if I just wanted to coast and get to $3 million in the next couple of years, that's going to be pretty simple, right? I just have to continue to add capital to the portfolio, keep it all 100% in the S&P 500, and after it doubles a little bit, and after I add more capital contributions to the portfolio, I can retire, right? But my thing is, I'm never going to retire. I'm either going to be doing podcasts like this, or I'm going to be. So for me, I need to find something that's going to get me very much like what we're talking about here, into the stratosphere. I need something that's going to get me closer to $8 to $10 million. That's the goal. Because $3 million, my lifestyle is not going to change. I'm still going to have a simple house like this. I might go on a couple of vacations a year, but I'm not going to be flying PJs around, private jets. That's not the kind of lifestyle you live with $3 million. Once you get to the place where you're $8 to $10 million, I just feel like that's where a place where your lifestyle can change a little bit more.
You can get kids, Matt.
What's that?
You can get kids and a wife.
Yeah, I can finally afford kids at $8 to $10 million. So that's kind of the thought process, right? Is just like, where do you want to be? If your goal is strictly to just get to $3 million, then there's easier ways to do that than where I'm at right now. And what I'm trying to achieve right now. So, but somebody said in the comments, you're 30, take on risk. I mean, yes and no, right? I think it all depends on, once you get $1 million, some people, they're the opposite of me. Once you get $1 million, I know people that get super, super risk averse, and they don't want to really even care about investing in the market anymore because they're just afraid that they're going to lose that $1 million. Versus me, I look at it as like, well, I've made 7 figures before. I can make 7 figures again. And, anyway, so my mindset is a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I agree with basically everything that you're saying. The only thing I react on with this guy's question is, if you already have the shares, like what is it that is making you want to sell them? Because besides all the points, right? Like, because I would look at it like, if I was like came to the logical conclusion that I'm buying the shares, right? Like, the only thing that would make me sell them is like family emergency or some sort of a financial emergency, or the thesis broke, right? Right. And because it's a very different question if he's asking like, I have $32,000 cash and I'm thinking about buying Rocket Lab, or should I do the S&P 500? But he's not asking that. He's like, I have the money in Rocket Lab, and should I sell it and have S&P 500 instead, And then if I look at Rocket Lab, like, what would be the reason to sell now? Like, I feel that we are going into, in less than a month, we are starting the best quarter that they've ever had. Probably they are going to make over 100 million in that quarter. We are starting a year where they're trying to double their launch, more than double their launch cadence, and we might have a new rocket on the pad. And I don't see, like, I think the worst that can happen is that Rocket Lab is the same price as it is now, and very easily we can go to 5, 6, 7, 8 next year based on what I said, But I have a very, very hard time to see how we would be lower than we are now next year,
Yeah, I mean, I could see us dipping into the high 3s, but I don't see the market cap dipping below $1.5 billion. It just doesn't really seem feasible for that personally. But I mean, it all just really depends on how much. Is $32,000 a lot to this person? Because I look at my Palantir position, and I'm still sitting there like, well, if $80,000 disappears or whatever the price is now, it's like, I'll be upset. But at the end of the day, like, I'm not going to be under a bridge begging for food, right? And even if I did, I'd have a couple weeks before it really mattered because I have a little bit of weight to lose. But the same thing with Rocket Lab here is like 20 grand isn't really going to hurt me all too much, right? So the thought process is like position yourself to a place where it starts to matter a little bit, and you won't be but you won't be entirely upset if it goes to zero. Like for me, if I was like some of these investors, if I was like you, Vince, I mean, I would have way more. I mean, my share count would probably be shit. If I was more like you, my share count would probably be more like I'm trying to think of the number, probably closer to like 70, 80,000 shares if I was more
Wow.
like you.
But when you
know?
say you were more like me, you mean that like higher part of your portfolio would be
Yeah, you're a lot more
okay.
concentrated in stuff than I am, and so you're going to see a lot more
It's funny.
outsized returns.
It's kind of misunderstood about me that the only reason why I'm so concentrated is because like when I feel confident to invest is like after hundreds of hours of research on a company, and I have to have the money also available, right? And then I'm not going to diversify for diversification's sake. So this money that I have out on the portfolio, like I know that I'm going to add similar amounts to it in the future, and then I feel it's like stupid investing for me to like do all this research, be super bullish about Rocket Lab, and then put 1/10 of the portfolio into Rocket Lab, and then 9 others into like companies that I didn't research enough. I don't know, like, because I feel that then you're like diversifying for diversification's sake, right? So my portfolio is not as crazy as it sounds. It's just like I happen to be in the process of building out the positions. So I feel very happy with, okay, like Rocket Lab position is built out. And now it's time to look for a new company. But I'm also not going to look for another company just to look for the other company. Like I feel like the next new company is going to find me somehow, probably maybe on a Cash Flow Chronicles something, or in some place,
There's a few
Finance Junkies.
that I'm exploring that I think will, because I'm looking for something like, because Palantir for me is just like a sit and waiting game, right? I don't.
Yeah.
3 years ago it was very much like well, let's see, and it was very much like let's look at the quarterly results, and slowly it got closer and closer to a point where I don't feel like I have to worry about Palantir anymore, and it's more of like when is the right jumping off point for that versus a Rocket Lab. It's still at a point where it's like, I feel confident that it'll do well, but there's still, to me, like a 20% chance it's sitting in the back of my mind where I'm like, I don't know, things can go sour in this industry pretty quick. And I'm looking, but once that sort of gets closer to a 10% and then eventually a 5%, and then hey, this company is throwing off so much cash now that it's a 2% black swan event that something has to happen for this thing to kind of go. So Rocket Lab's veering more towards that every single launch where they're getting closer and closer to profitability and their burn rate's decreasing and they're getting closer to a place where they're cash flow break even. So once that kind of happens, I feel like Rocket Lab will be in the same boat as Palantir, where it's kind of like now it's just a point at which I decide to take the exit ramp. I'm also looking for the next one, and I have Dutch Bros. I think that one's going to do relatively well, but that one makes money. That one's I think a little bit more certain in terms of being able to grow into its valuation and then some. But I'm looking for another not Palantir. I'm looking for another Rocket Lab that's like a potential 10 to 20x. That I could catch a little bit earlier. And Chris and I have tossed around some ideas that he's introduced me to one or two, maybe for a different day, but I've started to take a small position in. But I think, to me, the way I eventually look at the portfolio is it's likely going to be a very large chunk of S&P 500. I mean, I already have 500 shares of SPY. I look to grow that probably closer to 1,000 in the medium term. And my hope is eventually that's going to be a 2,000, 2,500 share position of just SPY. And I could get closer to that if I sold out of a lot of my individual positions like Amazon, Google, and I only focused on like Rocket Lab and Palantir and Accelera and stuff like that, as well as Dutch Bros. And I could get to a place where I maybe could take larger bite-sized positions of that because I have that stability and having, let's just say, a 7-figure position in SPY. But I haven't gotten myself to terms yet with that. Maybe if Google doubles or Amazon doubles, that I'm like, you know what? Now it's just time to play the high conviction game like you. But eventually I see, those are the two legs that I have for the stock portfolio, which is SPY pretty much, and then my conviction plays. But the real estate thing has started to take off for me as well, and I want to build more of that. So once the portfolio gets closer to, and I'm like 65% of the way there, I'll probably end up selling like half the stock position, and not specifically like everything split down the middle. So I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm selling half Palantir, half everything. It'll probably be like pick and choose, and I'll probably end up having, I'll probably have like another rental or two, and then have like a development company where I'm buying and knocking down and constructing new houses with a partner. And that'll have a leg of its own, because worst case scenario, I lose half of it, but I still have the other half, right? Which is the S&P 500, and it's growing pretty well. So it's growing, it's getting there, but it's too soon to be able to say that I'm ready to be able to get to the 8-figure club, because once I think I get to that place where I'm doing the real estate piece as well, and I'm juggling both the stocks, my 9-to-5 job, and the real estate piece, that'll be when I feel like the 8-figure club will be around the corner.
Yeah, and then you can buy an Electron launch. That's what somebody said.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because on the S&P 500, I don't know what it is with me. I'm not like, I feel that if I like, how do you call it? I agree with other people holding the S&P 500, but I'm like, if I do like all this time to study the stocks, then I do want to pick and choose them, you know, like I feel that depending on how much research you put in and how much time you have to do on the stock market, like for sure, I think for the average person, like the S&P 500 is the place to put the money, you know. But like for myself, yeah, maybe if I would exit investing, you know, like that I really like sort of retire and I'm not following my companies anymore, then it's like, okay, then I can just have the S&P 500 and not think about it. But as long as I'm able to do what I do and, you know, like listen to all the conference calls, follow the news, be on these podcasts, like I don't, like for me, it's it would feel like buying bonds, you know, like, right. Yeah.
I get it. I mean, I don't do much research on Google. I don't do much research on Amazon. I just look at the quarterly earnings versus like Palantir, Rocket Lab, Dutch Bros. I'm doing a little bit more like due diligence on. And so, you know, I can only limit, I would say, myself to like 4 or 5 big conviction plays. And those size of those plays will grow with time, right? I mean, eventually I feel like Palantir will eventually get sold. Half of it will get sold off, and I'll end up probably rolling that money into the next conviction play that I have. But you know, I think we're still a ways away from that personally. And I think personally for me, I think Palantir is only a few years away from buying back a shit ton of stock. Because I just don't see what else they're going to do with a lot of that capital. And once that starts happening, you're going to see whatever shares that you have grow in value at a minimum of 3% per year, just based off of the share buybacks that they end up doing. Now, I'm not talking about next year. I'm not talking about fiscal year 25. I'm talking about 2027, 2028. I just feel like that they're just going to have so much cash rolling in, they're not going to know what to do with it, that they're going to end up buying back a lot of stock. And it could be on the order of, you know, $500 to $1 million, or sorry, $500 million to $1 billion a year. But we'll have to wait and see.
And that's also something okay, now we'll get into Palantir Weekly. We're on the wrong show now. We should have spoken about this 12 hours ago or whenever we were on Palantir Weekly. But because I you know, like in my model, like I count with a dilution of 3% every year, right? And if you take out that dilution, it super much impacts the stock price. And we know that they are running a share buyback program, but they're not pulling the trigger themselves. So I don't know. I think it's more like a safety one at this point, in case there is some adverse market reaction or something. But yeah.
Well, I think right now, for specific, I can't really speak too much for Rocket Lab. Rocket Lab doesn't have too bad of a share-based compensation problem, but it is there. But the stock is also the market cap is also way smaller, so it could still end up being, 1% or something like that per annum. I have to double check. It actually probably is a good thing for me to look at. But Palantir's gotten down themselves to about $400 to $450 million a year, and at a market cap of 40-50 billion dollars, it's 1% of the market cap. So if they're able to buy back, let's just say $2 billion worth of stock a year, or $1 billion worth of stock a year, they're going to be able to fully offset that and start to actually eat into the shares, which to me, that's why Google, I think, is going to do really well. It's why Apple price has done really well. Like Apple, yes, the price to earnings has grown. The earnings themselves have grown, but the fact that Apple's price has gone 10x over the past 10 years, is mostly due to the fact that they bought back a shit ton of stock. So just kind of keep that in mind. I mean, they bought back hundreds of billions of dollars worth of stock. So I'm excited for the time, because a lot of times people look at the share price, but the share price of Palantir, let's just take, for example, because this is prudent to know for what happens with Rocket Lab as well, is the market cap of Palantir got to $40 to $50 billion in 2021, but the share price was $38 to $40. So, actually got closer to $60 billion at its peak, but that's neither here nor there. But the thought process is like there was only 1.5 billion shares outstanding. Then when the share price went down so much to $6-7, and they were still distributing a crap ton of share-based compensation, the share count blew up to 2.2 billion shares rather than the 1.5 billion shares. So it basically, in terms of total share count, went up 50% within the matter of a couple of years. And so, that happening, that means that to get back to $40 billion market cap, you're only looking at a $20 share price, versus before, to get to a $40 billion market cap, you had to be close to $30 a share. So because there's only 1.5 billion shares. So that share count is something that's very important. So just kind of keep that in mind, especially for people that are investing in like Snowflake and a lot of those other companies that are still, like Snowflake's distributing about $1.2 billion a year in share-based compensation. So it's about 3 times as much as Palantir right now. So we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening, but I'm fairly confident that a lot of the stocks we mentioned, Palantir, Rocket Lab, Dutch Bros, will all have a pretty long runway.
Exactly. So as a final question for tonight, what would each of you need to see to sell out of your position? Rocket Lab. So what would make you sell out of the position?
I would sell probably a partial position if it went to like $10 or $11 billion tomorrow. Like, say there was no Neutron, say there was no, cash flow break even or anything like that, and there was a short squeeze or something like that, and the stock price went to $20 again, I'd probably sell a pretty decent size of position, because I would anticipate that, or at least I'd sell a lot of covered calls, because I would anticipate that the stock price would probably come back down, because I just don't think that the valuation would support it. The only reason why I wouldn't do that is if something crazy were to happen, like Neutron is early, or so. I think that right now, with what we know, if the stock price went up to a $10 billion market cap or $12 billion market cap, I'd probably be like, okay, we still need some stuff to kind of show up. I'll take some profits, maybe not sell out of the whole position. What would cause me to sell out the whole position is if there was some sort of liability that was realized that could completely wipe out the company, some black swan event, or if Peter Beck is found to be some sort of liar, or there are some sort of accounting scandals or something of the like, that, which I don't foresee, by the way, but anything that would change kind of the fundamental trust in the organization, that would cause me to kind of second guess and potentially sell out. In terms of like, if there's no some sort of like big squeeze, short squeeze event or anything like that, where I would probably start to trim a large amount of profits, let's just say this is 5-10 years down the road, things are going as expected, Neutron coming to fruition, starting to get contracts, what have you. I would probably start to take some profits at about a $20 billion market cap, not completely sell out. If it somehow went to $100 billion market cap within the next 10 years, I would probably I would sell out of the entire position. I would say even if it went to a $50 billion market cap, I would hold a large portion of it still. Maybe a large portion is probably difficult. I've been thinking about keeping, even a Palantir, keeping about 25% of whatever position I start with. So even if it goes to, let's just say, $50 billion market cap, I'd probably keep 25% of that. Anticipation that it could, with inflation, over time, it'll probably go to a $200 billion market cap because the value of the dollar goes down when you're talking 20 years down the road. You know what I mean? Like $200 billion in 20 years is $100 billion today, right? So anyway, just some thoughts there. I think I don't foresee myself selling before Neutron unless some big scandal comes out.
Yeah.
And I don't foresee myself selling a large portion of my position until a $20 billion-ish market cap. Covered calls is a different story, and I hope liquidity picks up because the covered calls are few. The optionality for covered calls and the volume for covered calls is few and far between.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I'm on a very similar page that if something very crazy happens, like it becomes a meme stock and it shoots up in price, like I would also consider selling. But it would have to be a very crazy price for no reason. Like I think even if it would go to 20, I would still hold. So it would have to be, but I don't think that this is happening. And I think that Johnny Mac's question was more on the bearish side. So bearish wise, like for example, I sold out of Tesla because I had a thesis of how fast they're going to grow. What their demand was going to be like, what their margins were going to be like. And then I listened to the last earnings call, and then it was basically completely different than what I thought with this new interest rate environment. And then I decided to sell fully my position. So for me, like on Rocket Lab, if they would announce that they are not thinking to do the space infrastructure and Neutron is going to take 10 years longer to develop, and they will need to raise a lot of money, and there is very little demand for the Electron launches, and the space systems is also going to so meaning that somehow the company's prospects become very meaningfully different from my thesis, I would sell. But I have a very hard time to see, like I'm very, very confident in this investment, and even like the investment makes sense without the space infrastructure even being in place. Like that's just a call option at this moment. So something would, like a real black swan would have to happen, that it comes up that Peter Beck is like a drug addict who like falsifies all the accounting and or I don't know what would have to happen, but it would have to be some very serious.
I could see maybe this would take years to develop, though. I could see if, let's just say, for example, Relativity actually does hit the scene and it hits it hard, right? And SpaceX and Rocket Lab, sorry, not SpaceX, just Rocket Lab kind of falls behind in terms of their, I guess, prowess and where they are in terms of positioning, in terms of rocket launch, and the ability to be a big player in the space, then I could see myself, potentially switching one company for another. But at the moment, just based off of where we are with respect to how Rocket Lab has succeeded with over 35 launches on Electron successfully, over 40 launches total, and has a forecast to increase that by 50% next year alone. You know, I don't think it's waning like an Astra, where they're struggling to even grow revenue actually and having anemic growth. You know, so I would say it would take something drastic like that to have my foundational belief in the success of Rocket Lab be shaken.
Awesome. So thank you so much for tonight. Thank you for the audience for being here. This was a great episode. Make sure you subscribe to Matt's channel, and see you guys here next week.
Thanks all. Always fun.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Cheers all.